Protecting people and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic chemicals, that's the focus of 2011 Switzer Fellow Sarah Uhl. This is Switzer Network News.
The Toxic Substances Control Act passed in 1976, and at this point it's actually the oldest environmental law that's never been updated in the U.S. It's been highly unsuccessful at protecting humans and the environment from toxins despite its name. In fact, just 5 substances out of over 80,000 in commerce have now been restricted as a result of this law. Part of the problem is that the burden of proof to show that a chemical is directly causing a health effect is entirely on the federal government. We saw this in the early 90s when the EPA tried to ban asbestos. Surprisingly, the asbestos industry was successful in taking the federal government to court, and they found that the EPA had not met the very stringent burden of proof under the Toxic Substances Control Act. Another example of a flaw with the federal law is that it does not take into account the cumulative impacts of many different chemicals that are floating around in our bodies at the same time. It doesn't consider how some of these chemicals could actually interact and synergistically harm us. I believe very strongly that federal legislation is much more likely to pass if there is leadership at the state level and even at the local level in some cases. I spent a few years in Connecticut doing deep coalition building to try to build support for the kind of policy that we want to see at the federal level there at the state level. And within just a few years, we were able to pass phase-outs of a number of very toxic chemicals. There's a long history, actually, of states taking the lead when the federal government is falling behind in issues of chemical policy. Connecticut, in 2009, banned the hormone disruptor bisphenol A from reusable food and beverage containers and the linings of infant formula cans and baby food jar lids. So that's one example. We've also taken action to require green cleaning products in all of the state's public schools. And we even passed modernized lead and asbestos standards for children's products. Many people would have imagined that such toxic chemicals had already been addressed in those products, but we found that the federal government had not stepped up and Connecticut needed to play a role. Sadly, we can't shop our way out of this problem. And as we've seen on a number of environmental issues, having a few lobbyists in Washington, D.C. trying to fix a problem is not enough. It takes a diverse grassroots movement, really, of odd bedfellows to get things done, and it takes action at the local level. So even just starting with an ordinance that someone might press for in their own town is hugely important. This is a long-term goal. I don't believe that the federal chemical policy is going to improve overnight, but I do have a lot of hope that as states become leaders, as cities become leaders, and as this movement grows, change will happen.
This is Switzer Network News.